If you're watching expecting to hear that Japanese whiskey is a lighter style of whiskey or some trite cliches about millennia-old craftsmanship, then click away now because we are going way deeper than that. Welcome to Kanpai Planet, bringing you the world of Japanese drinks direct from the heart of Tokyo. I'm Mac, and today we're attempting to answer the question, what is Japanese whiskey? Recently, I published a video looking at Japan's new whiskey standards, and these new regulations have been generally well received by consumers who want to be confident that what they're buying is real Japanese whiskey. But these new regulations have rekindled an age-old debate amongst the cognoscenti. What is Japanese whiskey? Or what does it mean for a whiskey, or any drink for that matter, to be made anywhere? Tipplers and those who cater to them with their AOs and their GIs are obsessed with this question. It's the reason why sparkling wine in southern Australia, made by the Shandong Group, cannot be called what it is: champagne. Now, let's take a step back. There are plenty of articles and videos out there telling you that Japanese whiskey is a lighter style of whiskey with an emphasis on blending. But are these really functions of the whiskey being made in Japan? At its most basic, most whiskey drinkers would agree that made in Japan should mean that fermentation, distillation, and maturation occur within the as currently defined borders of the nation state of Japan. But should everything that goes into that whiskey originate in Japan? The new Japanese whiskey standards, which closely follow Scotch standards, stipulate that raw ingredients must be limited to malted grains, other cereal grains, and water extracted in Japan. I mean, the Scots have been making whiskey with imported grain for ages, some even coming from England. Casks used for aging often originate far from where the whiskey is made. So for example, American bourbon casks or Spanish sherry casks used to cradle Scotch. Does a whiskey need the character of Japan's famous Mizunara oak to be truly Japanese? I personally would like to have seen the new standards require 2 years of aging in Japan, as opposed to the 3 needed in Scotland. This would have been an acknowledgement that Japan's climate is on the whole more temperate and humid than Scotland, which can lead to faster maturation. I'm pleased to see that there weren't any requirements imposed on cask types, because now we can have some fun with wood. Like these, aged in sake casks. Overall though, Japanese whiskey is firmly in the Scottish tradition, and it's not possible to reliably distinguish Scotch from Japanese drams by taste alone. But why should we even be limited to making whiskey in the Scottish tradition in the first place? The United States is the world's biggest producer of corn, and so it follows that their native spirit, bourbon, is made with a minimum 51% corn. Now similarly, Japan has a long history with rice, and rice whiskey or Kogi whiskey is absolutely delicious, and in many ways it's more Japanese than making whiskey with malted barley. Now, conversations like this often end up at the concept of terroir. Now, terroir is usually the province of the oenophile. The geology, topography, and climate where the grapes are grown impart their characteristics to the drink. Bordeaux, sun and soil on your taste buds. But can terroir really influence the final taste of a whiskey? I mean, the grain goes through so much processing that its final impact must be minimal compared to grapes or even other parts of the whiskey process. Does terroir even survive distillation? Ireland's Waterford distillery is banking heavily on the idea that it does, and that it matters quite a lot. To gather evidence in support of this, they commissioned a study led by Oregon State University, whose results were published in February this year. They concluded that the underlying origin of the grain has a noticeable, significant, and correlating impact on the sensory perception of the final product. Now, there may be some cynicism that a party with a vested interest in proving their point has sponsored a study that ultimately proved their point. The Kanpai Planet Institute of Studies, in association with Kanpai Planet, has concluded that Kanpai Planet is the greatest YouTube channel of all time. This is not the first study of its kind though. This one, from 2019 looked at the impact of corn variety and Texas terroir on flavour and alcohol yield in new make bourbon and came to a similar conclusion. Now, it makes sense to me that you might taste some terroir in a whiskey that hasn't been aged, or even a whiskey that's only been aged briefly in new oak, but that clear liquid is not the whiskey that we normally drink. A whiskey's flavour undergoes complex and delicious transformation during maturation. In fact, it's the reason why we bother maturing it in the first place. We might as well just drink it off the still. And I suspect that these differences become less pronounced over time. The microclimate and macroclimate of maturation is actually very hard to control from a scientific perspective, and I really look forward to further research on the matter. Now, here's an interesting anecdote. My favourite Japanese whiskey is Hakushu. When I first visited the Hakushu distillery, an incredible place at the foothills of Mount Kaikoma, the staff at the reception desk asked me if I also wanted to enjoy the mineral water plant tour. Naruhodo. It turns out that my favourite whiskey is made with my favourite mineral water. Now I know what you're thinking.
What a lot of people always say, water sommelier? No way, that has to be from the onion or something like this.
But it's true. I absolutely adore Suntory Tenensui, and that's when I first started thinking about terroir and whiskey. There's another angle to consider. Human or social terroir refers to people rather than soil. It's perhaps what Chichibu Distillery founder Ichiro Akoto is referring to when he says Japanese whiskey is whiskey made by Japanese people, that their whiskey is a product of individuals and the experiences that have shaped them. And I agree, a whiskey maker's passion and creativity may well have far more impact on the taste of what's in your glass than the ingredients or where they came from. But this also raises the question of what it means to be a Japanese person. So, what is Japanese whiskey? If whiskey is influenced by terroir in any form, and we want that provenance to continue, then we should be making whiskies that express the place where they come from. It's certainly possible to make a hyper-parochial whiskey, but requiring that standard of all whiskies seems over the top, and we certainly shouldn't require it of Japanese whiskey. As a huge supporter of global citizenship, I love world whiskies. Taking some spirit from elsewhere and putting a local spin on it is a lot of fun and leads to some interesting drinks, but just remember to label it appropriately. Now, does it matter as long as it tastes good? Well, yes, these things do matter. There is a lot of national pride and money at stake. Terroir has become conflated with other terms such as farm to table, craft and sustainability, and it's become a valuable asset of smaller distilleries as they compete with larger established brands. And the fact that terroir doesn't have a direct English or Japanese translation makes it very easy for those who want to manipulate and exploit the term. Developments in these discussions are going to keep drinks fans debating these issues for some time, and that's the fun of it. Until next time, Kanpai!